Hey, how's it guys? In this tutorial, we'll learn how to build an Amazon product scraper using Python. Now, before we start the tutorial, I just want to point out that it is highly recommended that you have used Python to create at least some simple programs, since we'll be creating a complete web scraper from scratch. Now, if I'm new to web scraping, then you may ask, what are some of the benefits? Now, for example, here let me do a search for, let's do Tesla. Alright, so for example, now let's say I want to search for any products related to Tesla. And right now it's only giving me 1,000 results, and that's okay. Alright, so here we can see that the last page is on page 20. But if we look at the total result, we have over 1,000 products actually. So essentially, we're going to have more than 20 pages of results. And by creating a web scraper, we can bypass the page limit. So assuming that we have 100 pages, but Amazon only shows you the first 7 pages or the first 20 pages. In that case, I should be able to grab the product details for all the products based on whatever the total results I have right here. Now you can also use a web scraper to notify that when certain products are on sale, or if you want to track product price change, or you simply just want to put all the products into a single page, and it's going to be easier for you to view all the products in one place. And for companies and analysts, they will be able to compile different data points for their analysis. Now let's look at the agenda. Right, so for this tutorial, we have 5 to-do items. So the first one is optional, but before I start any project, I'm going to create a Python virtual environment to manage my project. So once we're in Amazon is, if you try to make a simple request code to Amazon, most likely your request is going to get blocked. And to avoid being blocked by Amazon, I'll be using a Python framework called Playwright. And there are other libraries that will also be installing, such as pandas and Beautiful Soup. And once we install the Python libraries, as well as creating the Python virtual environment to manage our project, then we're going to dive into how to examine the URL and the HTML structure, and which I forgot to put that in here. And after that, we can go ahead and create our Python script. Now, to make the web scraper, we're going to create 2 different functions. The first function is going to cache the Amazon product page into a local file, and that's what we call caching. And I'll share the benefits of caching later on in the tutorial. And once we download all the HTML pages that contains all the product details, then we're going to create a Python function to extract the product detail or data points. And that's everything I'm going to cover in this tutorial. Now with that being said, let's get started. Alright, so now let's create the Python virtual environment. Now I'm going to launch my terminal. I'll be using Git Bash, and I'm on a Windows PC, just an FYI. Alright, so to create a Python virtual environment, it's pretty easy. You'll simply type Python -m, VMV stands for the module that I want to use, followed by the environment name. Now for this project, I'm going to name the project. Let's do Amazon product scraper demo, and enter. Now once the environment is created, I'm going to actually go into the environment first, and it's going to be this directory right here. Now I need to set it into the folder. Then I need to activate the environment, and since I'm using Git Bash, I can basically type dot or source followed by the activate file path and enter. Alright, so to create this project, we're going to install 3 libraries. So here I'm going to type pip install. The first one is going to be Playwright, followed by pandas, followed by Beautiful Soup. And for Beautiful Soup, it's going to be Beautiful Soup 4. And enter. Alright, so once all the libraries are installed, we need to install the driver. And here I'll simply type Playwright install and enter. And that should install the driver. All right, so I'm going to create a script, and let's call this script Amazon page downloader.py. Now I'm going to launch my code editor, and I'll be using VS Code. All right, so let's look at the agenda first. Let me refresh the page. Right, so we've done the first two tasks. Now we need to examine the URL and the HTML structure. And this one will come later, but for now, let's look at the URL. All right, so I noticed that here I have a typo, so that's why it's only give me 1,000 results. It should be Tesla. All right, so if we look at the total results, we now get 90,000, actually more than 90,000 results. If I scroll all the way down to the pagination, so noticing that here we only get up to 7 pages. But here, let me just copy the URL first. All right, so I'm going to grab page 1 and page 2's URL. Now, if we look at these two URLs, the first thing that you notice that for page 1, it does not have this page parameter. And some of the properties, such as this CRID property, as prefix and this reference property. So I think those are used for cookies and tracking, so I'm not sure. But if we take this out, and if I simply here, I'll just copy this. And I'll simply copy and paste. But here I'm going to change the page to page 1. And I'll simply redirect the URL to the first page. So essentially, it's okay if we insert the page parameter to navigate to the first page. So I'm going to grab this link here. So that's going to be our base. And I'll name this as URL first. Now, just for testing purpose, I'm going to go back. And let's say I want to change the product URL, not product URL, product name. Let's do MetaQuest 3. And I'll basically change the query to MetaQuest 3. All right, so once we know how the URL is formatted, so we can now open our Python script, and we can go ahead and import the Playwright library. Now here I need to activate the environment. All right, so I'm going to create a function. I'll name the function download Amazon product page. Now this function has 4 parameters. So 1 required parameter, which is going to be our query, followed by the front page and to page, because sometimes you can get way too many results and you're only interested in the first several pages, as well as where all the HTML files is going to get saved. And right now, here, let me go ahead and create a folder. And I'll name this as export. All right, so I'm going to insert my main routine. I'm going to set my query to MetaQuest 3. And for the export location, I'll set that to my export folder. All right, so when we use Playwright, so the first thing we want to do is want to launch our Playwright instance. Now, for this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to run Playwright synchronously. And you can use Playwright to run asynchronously, meaning that you can run multiple browser instances at the same time. And that's going to be a little bit more advanced, and that's usually the method that I use when I'm doing web scraping type of task. And I'll cover those in future videos. But for this tutorial, Since this exercise is aiming toward more beginner levels, so I'm going to make everything as simple as possible. All right, so let's insert the sync playwright method. I'll name this as Playwright. Then we're going to launch our browser. Now, within Playwright, we have 3 different browsers. So one is Firefox. Then we have Chrome browser. And the last one is going to be the WebKit browser. And I think this one is what Apple uses for Safari, and which I've never used before. So I'm going to delete this one. Now for our exercise, I'm going to use Chrome, since Chrome is the most popular browser today. And I'll come out Firefox. Now to launch a Chrome browser instance, from the Playwright object, we'll reference the browser type, followed by using the method .launch. Now let's look at the parameters first. Alright, so if I'm using a custom or older version of browser executable file, in that case, it will simply provide the driver's executable file path to this executable path argument. Now, channel is going to be a little bit more advanced. I'm not going to cover that right now. Argument is when you have other parameters that are not listed in here. In that case, then you can provide those arguments. And also have the option to ignore any default arguments, meaning that sometimes you simply just don't want to use any default settings provided by the Chrome browser. Now the handle arguments, those are a little bit more advanced. I'll skip those for now. Now timeout is one of the important parameters that you'll need to know. So timeout means that if an action does not have any response from the website for certain amounts of time, then you can set giving the duration, how long do you want to wait until an exception happens. Now this one will be to use the window environment variable. Now headless is one of the most critical parameters that you need to know. So most of the browsers that we use is not headless. Headless means that you want the browser to run in the background. And for web scraping, some of the website checks and some of the websites do not. And Amazon is one of the websites that does check the headless setting. And I'll skip the developer tools. And you can also provide your own proxy if you want to rotate your IP addresses. In downloads path means that when you download a file, where those files should go to, or where should those files be saved to. Now, slow MO is one of the parameters that I use pretty often. So this parameter allows you to set the waiting period or wait time between each action. Now, say you have 2 actions. The first action is going to click a button. Then by setting the slow MO parameter value to 1000, meaning 1 second. Now if I change this to 10,000, that means that between each action, I'm going to wait 10 seconds until I do the next action. And you can also use the sandbox version of the browser by setting this value to 2. Now traces directory, that one is a little bit more advanced, so I will not cover that in this video. Now if I'm using Firefox as the browser, then in that case, you can provide additional settings, such as user agent, cookies, and other things. But I also think that you can also do the same with the Chrome browser as well. Alright, so let's worry about that later or for later videos. Alright, so let me just do a test run. So here we want to launch the Chrome browser, and that's going to tie to this browser object. Now after we open the browser, we want to close the browser after we finish everything. Then we want to close the Playwright instance. And we need to type, and it should be Playwright. And this will be .stop to close the instance. Alright, so here if we do a test run, so if I simply code a function, and I'll pass the query, And for the export location, I'll pass the export location variable. All right, so if I pass F5 to run the script, it's giving me this error. Let's see. All right, so that's weird. I'm going to type print here in X, and I'll run the script. And here's the X value. So that means that this code right here is executed successfully. Oh, I know why. Because here I forgot. I'm using Context Manager to create a Playwright object, which automatically closes the instance. All right, so let me close this. All right, so I need to put a browser object.close method inside the Context Manager block. Now let's try again. All right, so that runs fine. And the reason why you're not seeing anything open is because we haven't opened any page. Now from the browser object, I want to open a new page. So I can use the new page method. And that will open a new tab. And I'll name the tab as page. Now here, from the page from argument, so this will be from page number in range. And my range is going to be page from to page 2. And we need to add the value by 1. All right, so here I'm going to insert a print statement. And I'll simply copy paste the code here. And this will be page number. Oops. All right, let me fix that. All right, now I want to navigate to the Amazon page. And it's going to be this URL right here. All right, so to navigate to a page or to a URL, from the page object, we'll use the go-to method, followed by the URL that I want to go to. Then I want to wait until everything is loaded. So we can use the wait for load state. Actually, wait for load state. Yeah, that's right. Now, if we look at the documentation, and should be under parameters. So we have 4 different options. Load, which is going to be wait for load event to be fired. So that basically just means that once the destination URL send a response, then it's going to pass the validation. First, using the DOM content loader value. So this one will wait until everything is loaded first, such as the page content, all the images are loaded. Then it's going to move on to the next action. And this one, network idle. So this one I'm going to skip. You should not use this value for anything. All right, now for our purpose, we want to make sure that we load everything first, then we can move on to the next action. And here I'm going to change the slow MO value to 1000, meaning that between each action, I only want to wait 1 second. And with Amazon, you want to make sure that you do everything slowly to avoid that being get IP banned or get blocked. All right, so this will be DOM content loader. All right, so let's take a look. So we're going to just set this to page from. Let's navigate from page 1 to page 3. All right, so I'm going to run the script, and let's take a look. All right, so it's going to open the page and navigate to the product page. Now this is product 2, actually not product 2, page 2 and page 3. Now I want to show you one thing that I forgot to show you. So I'm going to name this script test.py. Now if I try to run this script using the HTTPX to make a simple request code to the product search page. And let me go ahead and install the package. All right, so if I go ahead and run this script, now I'm going to get this 503 response back from Amazon. And what this means is that Amazon recognizes the request. However, it's saying that we do not want to grant you the permission to view our site. So that's why scripting Amazon has always been challenging for a lot of people, because you simply cannot just make a request code directly to Amazon's website. So that's why we need to use a more sophisticated framework or library to be able to create the web scraper, I guess. All right, so now in terms of caching the HTML markups, I'm simply going to save each page as a HTML file. All right, so here I'm going to save the page. So this is going to be the location where you want to save the file, followed by the query name. So this is my naming convention. And I don't need this one here. Then I'm going to save the file. And once I'm finished, I'm simply going to close the browser. And that's it. All right, now let's do a test run. So let's go into the export folder, and I'll run the script. Now, once we download the HTML files, so at this point, we can reuse these 3 files as the base to extract or to examine the HTML structure. All right, so caching is something that a lot of newcomers or beginners fail to do. So some of the benefits caching a web page, for one, it can reduce the server load to minimize the repeated requests that you need to make to the same website or to the same web page. And it also helps with speed up the data retrieval. So because we have a local file, so when we open the page, it's a lot faster to examine the HTML structure or the HTML markup. We can extract the data points much faster. And some other benefits, such as we can control the rate limit, and it's more reliable, and we can do our offline analysis. So in case if your computer went offline, you'll still have the data source. All right, now let's look at one of the pages. So I'm going to simply open the page. Now, for this lesson, I'm only going to show you how to extract 3 properties: the product name, product URL, and the price. Now, if I'm interested in extra other data points, such as whether if a product is a prime product, or if I want to extract the rating and the rating count, as well as if a product has any coupon, such as this save 10% coupon, save 20% coupon. You can download the source code from the link in the description below, which contains the more complete source code. All right, so let's go to the top. All right, so before we extract the data points, such as different properties, price, URL, and product name, I want to insert some conditions to make this project a little more challenging. So the first condition I want to implement is that if we look at the page results per page, so we have 16. But if you count the total items in this page, are you going to get more than 16 products? And that's because the sponsored product is actually not one of the 16 results. So this is actually extra. So my goal here is I only want to scrape the products where the product is not sponsored. And some of the products may not have price. And that's one thing I noticed. So we also want to address that issue, and that'll be my second condition. All right, so let me open a new script, and this will be my main.py script. Oops. Let me save. Now, for the output, we want to have the option to save the output as a JSON file, Excel file, CSV file. It's all up to you because we'll be using Pandas library, which makes creating the output file pretty easy. Now, to organize the data points, I'll be using this name tuple function. And to manage my directory, I'll be using the path class. And Beautiful Soup is going to be to extract the data points or the properties from my HTML markup. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create my name tuple object, and it's going to be my record template. And I'll name the record template Amazon product. Now, if I've used Google APIs, then you will notice that Google APIs use very similar approach when creating the data outputs. All right, so I'm going to insert my main routine. Now, to make everything into a single script, I'm going to take these 3 lines and I'll put that right here. That should be fine. All right, so this one is going to be downloading the HTML file. Copy that. All right, so we're going to import a function. So from Amazon page downloader module, I'll import a function. Now, when we execute this function, it's going to export the HTML files to the export folder. And I'll just name this as source dir. Now, to compile every single record into a single master table, I'm going to create empty list called records. Then I'm going to create a variable to basically indicate that if I want to ignore sponsored product or not. And this one, HTML search string. So just in case, if you have HTML pages for different products, I want to be able to use this string to specify which HTML files that I want to extract. All right, so let's do this. I'll name this to Tesla. Actually, Tesla Model 3. And I'll make this as 5 pages. All right, so here I'm going to iterate each file. And this will be, so I don't actually need this. So this will be coming from this query string. All right, so here I'm going to iterate each HTML file based on the query. Then we're going to open the, actually not open. We're going to load the HTML markups into a soup object. So here we can say beautiful soup, and we'll load the content, and we'll use the HTML.parser method. So there are actually several different methods that we can use to parse the HTML elements. Now I want to go back to the page. Now here, let's look at one of the products markup. So I'm going to select this one here, Meta Quest 3 charging dock. All right, so I'll right click, inspect, and that'll basically open what we call the developers tool. Now it's going to highlight the element that associated to the property that I select. So let me do that again. Now I want to know where this properties element is located. So I'm going to point to this element right here, right click, inspect. And I'll highlight this element right here. All right, so at this point, it's all come down to figure out the patterns. So because we have multiple products, so we need to figure out for each product block, what does the element look like? So if we look at these, let me go back. All right, so this is going to be the first product that we're going to extract. Now, anything above, we want to ignore. Let me make the font a little bit bigger. So this is actually the hardest part whenever you're doing a web scraping project. All right, so what you want to do here is you want to compare the tag, it's not tag, the attributes of each element, and to figure out the differences between this element here in this element. And that will be the key to determine what logic that you need to use to extract the correct product catalog. Now, if we compare these two elements, you'll see that for the regular product catalog, we have this data component type attribute. First, this one, which is outside the product catalog. It does not have the data component type attribute. I also want to figure out the parent block that contains every single product. And it will be this one here. So I'm going to actually starting out from here. So I'm going to return the HTML markup from this element here, which contains everything that I need. Then I'm going to narrow it down to extract the product summary from each block, from each product block. All right, so what I can do here is from the soup object, I'm going to print the print statement, processing file, followed by the file name. Then I want to return the element that contains all the products. So I can use soup.find, followed by the tag name. And it should be this one here, I think. Actually, not this one. I'm going to use this one here. So I'm going to use that element as my base. Then I want to return the product elements. So from the result of this element, I want to use the find all method, followed by the attributes value and conditions. So here I'm simply going to check these four properties. So as long as data index attribute is not blank, and the data isn't attribute is not blank, and the data component type contains the string s dash search result, and for the data cell widget, as long as this element contains the string search result underscore, they want to store that into this products list. And once I do that, so I should have a list that corresponding to the 16 products that the result is showing. Now, let me just show you a sample output of what the table looks like. So this one is going to be for the complete script, which the source code is in the link in the description below. All right, so we have a name, and we're not going to do ratings. And we're not going to show prime. All right, so just name, price, URL. And yeah, so this is what the output is going to look like. So we'll be able to extract all the products in a single table, and which is pretty cool. Now, to extract the product details, and it can be anything that you want to extract. So I'm going to create a function. Let me fix the typo. All right, so we're going to pass the product element. So basically, it's going to be each of right here. So it's going to be each of, let me put it side by side. All right, so it's going to be each of these elements. So it's going to be product 1, product 2, product 3, and so on. So we're going to pass this element block to this function here. And from there, we can figure out the pattern of the structure, not pattern. We can figure out the structure of how the price information, product information, URL information are located. Now, for product name, it's under the h2.a.span element. Then we can reference the text. And for the URL, because the URL reference is located inside the attribute. Alright, let me do this. I'll simply right click, inspect. That'll be faster. And it's going to be this link right here. This href link. And this is the logic that you can use to extract the URL. And for the price, you can reference the element that find. Then want to locate this child element. And because the price information is not always available, so want to check if this element returns anything. Actually, not element. If this method returns anything. And if it does, then simply return the text. Otherwise, return none. Then I want to compile that into this Amazon product record. Alright, so at this point, I can say, and this should be inside the loop. Alright, so I can say for product in products. And here I want to indicate that if I want to ignore the sponsored product, which I have my condition set right here. So right now I'm setting that to false. So I don't want to ignore any sponsored product. So basically I can say if this condition is true, so this means that I want to ignore sponsored product. Then I want to check if the product name contains the string sponsored. And if this condition is met, then I want to go ahead and extract the product information. Now, if the ignore sponsored value is false, then I simply just want to grab every single product's summary or detail, regardless if the product is sponsored or not. Then we can export the data set from the records list into a data frame. Then we can take the data frame and export the data set as an Excel file or a CSV file. Now let's do a test run. So I'm going to, I already changed the query to Tesla Model 3. Alright, so I'm going to run it. And hopefully the script will run successfully. Alright, so we now have an error. Now let's troubleshoot the error. So saying that this directory does not exist. Alright, so I know why, because here this should be export, not exports. So let me do this. I'm going to insert a check. So I'm going to say if source directory exists, and want to reverse the value. So if the source directory does not exist, then I want to raise an error. Let's do file, not found error. And we can say source directory is not found. Alright, so let me try again. And let me terminate all the Chrome sessions. Now here I'm going to put an X right here. And I know this folder does not exist. So I should expect so I should expect that this file not found error is going to raise. Then I'm going to fix the folder path. And I'll run the script again. Right, so it looks like the caching is finished. And my loop here, array every single HTML file and put that together into a single table and export the output as a CSV file. Now let me open the file and let's take a look at what we have. Alright, so if I look at the table, we have 300 results from how many pages? From 5 pages. Alright, so just to make sure that, so we're going to do the quick validation. So if I go into this URL here, and I'll copy and paste. And that should be the same product. Top fit for Tesla Model Y and Model 3. It's the same product name. So I know that my script is working correctly. Right, so this is going to be everything I'm going to share in this video. And if you have any question or any feedback, please leave them in the comment section below. And if you find this video useful, please don't forget to give this video a like and click on the subscribe button. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.